This week, the central question is no longer simply the price of oil. It is the cost of moving it safely. Over the past month, risk teams in London have repeatedly updated their Red Sea scenarios. Shipping companies operating through the Strait of Hormuz have been activating contingency plans that, until recently, remained untouched in emergency folders. Across Europe, energy officials are holding discreet consultations that have not yet been made public. This is no longer background noise. It is the global energy system operating under measurable supply pressure. And in every serious routing model, every sovereign risk calculation, and every strategic map now being drawn behind closed doors, one geography keeps returning to the center of the analysis. Not Saudi Arabia, not Qatar, not even the United States. Israel, a country with no major oil reserves and no natural claim to dominate the global energy map, yet one that is increasingly central to the conversation. The choke point is no longer theoretical. For decades, the Strait of Hormuz was treated as a known weakness in the global energy system. Serious, but manageable. A variable to monitor, not necessarily one to redesign the entire system around. That assumption has changed in 2026. Roughly 21 million barrels of oil move through Hormuz each day, crossing a passage that is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. In physical terms, the road is smaller than many daily commuter corridors. In strategic terms, however, it carries enormous weight. Over the past month, the security risk attached to that corridor has reached a level that insurance markets, logistics firms, and government treasuries can no longer quietly absorb. Saudi Arabia's traditional answer to this problem was built in steel decades ago, the East-West Pipeline. This artery, 48 inches in diameter and stretching 200 kilometers, links the kingdom's oil fields to the Red Sea port of Yanbu without depending on open water. As of early 2026, it is operating at full rated capacity of approximately 7 million barrels per day. But there is a detail that often disappears in public discussion. Yanbu's export terminals can only physically load about 4.5 to 5 million barrels per day onto vessels. The pipeline can deliver more than the port can release. The constraint does not vanish. It simply moves downstream, where it takes on a different form and creates a different vulnerability. That has become the defining pattern of every workaround engineered in this region. One bottleneck is solved, and another appears in its place. For years, the world has tried to work around Hormuz without truly building a way beyond it. That is why the strategic conversation has shifted. The question is no longer how to manage a disruption at Hormuz. The question is how to create a system that can survive one on a permanent basis. The corridor that keeps returning. In March 2026, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly revived a proposal that has circulated in strategic planning circles for years without reaching construction. It is a trans-regional energy corridor that would move Gulf crude westward across Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, and into the Eilat terminal. There, 600,000 cubic meter storage facilities, originally part of the 1968 Trans-Israel project, are being retrofitted with AI-enabled SCADA systems designed to handle the higher sulfur crude profiles used by Gulf producers. From Eilat, the oil would feed into the Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline and reach the Mediterranean without passing through the Suez Canal, without waiting in maritime queues, and without depending on canal tolls or traffic constraints. One version of the corridor spans roughly 700 kilometers and is estimated to carry between 1.5 and 2.5 million barrels per day. That volume would not replace Hormuz. It was never meant to. But it would change the pressure equation for every government and company tied to the supply chain. And that is the real purpose of the architecture. The Eilat-Ashkelon line remains one of the most misunderstood pieces of infrastructure in the region. It was built in the late 1960s during a period of Iranian-Israeli cooperation, with the original purpose of moving oil from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean across 254 kilometers of desert. It required no locks, no canal authority, and no maritime bottlenecks. When it was operational, it offered a faster route than Suez for westbound cargo. That arrangement ended abruptly after the political realignment of 1979. The oil stopped flowing, and the pumping stations entered a long period of dormancy. The environment in April 2026 has brought those stations back into planning discussions. There is a striking irony here that strategic analysts notice often, even if it is rarely discussed publicly. Infrastructure originally built to serve Iranian oil exports is now being studied as one of the most practical mechanisms for reducing dependency on the same broader corridor. Pipelines outlast governments. Roads survive political alliances. Infrastructure retains a memory that policy often tries to erase. The engineering challenge, however, is not trivial. Saudi and Iraqi crude often has a higher sulfur content and different physical characteristics from the lighter oil grades the system was originally designed to handle. That is why the SCADA retrofitting at Eilat matters. Running incompatible crude through aging infrastructure under full pressure is not merely a logistics issue. It is a structural failure waiting to happen. The European dimension changes everything. This is where the analysis changes shape. This is not only a Middle Eastern story. It is increasingly a European energy security story. As of April 2026, European energy reserves are at critically low levels. The German chemical sector and the Italian power grid are only weeks away from shipping delays becoming something far more disruptive. In Brussels, the official language has shifted toward managed load distribution, a term that effectively means sequenced service interruptions organized by region and demand priority. The EastMed pipeline, once seen as a possible route for Eastern Mediterranean gas into Europe, remains stalled by maritime boundary disputes, and there is little sign of urgency in resolving them. At the same time, every alternative route Europe might have relied on is either constrained, contested, or dependent on the same Hormuz corridor now under pressure. In that environment, the Israeli corridor is no longer just a pipeline. It is beginning to function as Europe's strategic reserve position. That reality is driving private discussions that have not yet become public announcements. The countries positioned along this emerging route, Israel, Jordan, and potentially Iraq through the proposed Basra-Aqaba connection, are gaining significance that reaches far beyond regional politics. If constructed, the Basra-Aqaba pipeline could move more than 2 million barrels per day from southern Iraqi production fields to the Red Sea, creating another supply node feeding into the same western route. The vulnerability that feasibility studies undercount, this is where 2026 diverges sharply from earlier strategic assessments. A pipeline's above-ground infrastructure is vulnerable in ways that are visible, measurable, and relatively familiar. Those risks can be priced, modeled, and addressed with defensive systems. In the Jordan corridor, advanced protection measures and drone intercept systems are already visible in commercial satellite imagery. For physical infrastructure, defense procurement provides a recognizable response. Digital infrastructure is different. The Eilat-Ashkelon retrofit is designed to be partially air-gapped, meaning the most critical control systems are physically isolated from the public internet. But from a systems security perspective, no isolation is absolute. Security researchers describe these weaknesses as unintended vector entries, places where a firmware update, a physical maintenance visit, or a vendor access point becomes the true point of exposure. A maintenance terminal in a remote pumping station, a firmware update routed through a third-party server, a workstation that bridges isolated systems and ordinary operational workflows. This is the air-gapped vulnerability, the illusion of complete separation when, in reality, the attack surface has simply moved from the network to the supply chain and the physical environment. The cyber-physical profile of this corridor, every pressure sensor, flow control node, export terminal interface, and software layer between Basra and Ashkelon represents a class of risk that the original feasibility studies did not model, because the threat environment did not yet exist when those studies were written. In 2026, advanced defense systems may protect the visible infrastructure, but the operational software layer requires an entirely different framework. The cost of delay, if the Israel-Jordan corridor does not become operational before summer, The window for strategic arbitrage begins to close under conditions that may be much harder to reopen. At that point, the Mediterranean does not become a fallback corridor. It becomes a geographic dead end. European reserves will not pause while diplomacy continues. Lloyd's pricing will not wait for construction to begin. And the leverage held by any actor capable of constraining Hormuz does not decrease while an alternative remains trapped in planning documents. It only increases. No construction has started. No final agreements have been locked in. The project remains in the feasibility and diplomatic stage. The world is at the point where every serious analyst can see the need, but no government has yet paid the political cost required to move from analysis to implementation. That is why the deeper question matters. In a region where a pipeline is never just a pipeline, where every kilometer of infrastructure carries political meaning, and where the map itself becomes part of the argument, which architecture carries the greater long-term risk, a global supply chain that depends on a choke point everyone can see model and defend with conventional tools, or a supply chain that depends on a corridor whose most sensitive vulnerability sits not in the steel, not in the visible infrastructure, but in the digital integrity of the control systems that keep it running. The Eilat-Ashkelon line may prove to be a bridge toward greater supply chain stability, or it may become the most strategically significant high-value node the region has ever placed on the operational map. The answer will shape more than oil flows. It may help determine who holds leverage over the next phase of global energy security.